Now, we're here this evening for one reason and one reason only, and that is for the spiritual welfare of all of our children, and particularly your children, who I said are the next generation of Christians here in Inver. And I suppose one reason why we're having the meeting this evening is because of something Father Sweeney said in his homily on the baptism of the Lord Sunday, which was earlier in December. And he was giving out a little bit, and he was talking about the fact that in our modern day church, it would appear that a lot of what we do with regard to our children is empty ritual. And that word really kind of stuck in my head. And what he was saying is that when children are brought to the church by their parents for baptism, there are sacred promises made by the parents, not to the priest, not to the parish, but directly to God, that they will overlook and bring about the religious Catholic formation of their children. And that doesn't seem to happen more often than not. And it's a matter of coming to Mass for Easter and Christmas, and for First Communion and Confirmation, and then that is the end of the line. And what we would like to try to do in the parish with this particular programme for 2024 is to try to get a real, sincere commitment of the parents to follow through on the sacred promises made at baptism, and to ensure that the children are really progressing in the Christian life, because all of these sacraments are important milestones to the fullness of living out of our baptismal promises and being adult members ultimately, in the case of confirmation, of the Catholic Church. And Father Sweeney said that in the Ireland of today, First Communions and Confirmations is more about bouncy castles and parties and all that than it is about commitment to Christian living. So why is Christian living and Christian commitment important? And why is Jesus important? Now, that's a question we all have to ask ourselves, but I want to tell you, or to share with you this evening, why Jesus is important to me. I was diagnosed with something called multiple myeloma, which is a cancer of the bone marrow, back in 2013. It is an incurable cancer, and you have a life expectancy of somewhere between 8 and 10 years. I share the same distinction with the wife of Dr. Tony Houlihan, who passed away back during the time of all of those COVID updates that we were getting on the news every evening. So through the forum, I arrive at 2021, and it's my 8th year. I start the 3rd and final line of chemotherapy in Letterkenny Hospital. And I was told by the doctors I should get at least 2 years out of this before it would become ineffective. But this 3rd line of chemotherapy just didn't work at all. They tried mixing and matching with other drugs, but my cancer marker was going up and up and up, and when it gets beyond a certain point, it rises exponentially. So I was a bit worried, and I was trying to not think about too much where I was going, right? But I had a clinic. It would have been the end of June 2021, and the doctor sat me down and he said, "Your cancer marker is over 6,000. You have already started into kidney failure, and after that there is looming liver failure, and then multi-organ failure." And then there was a kind of a silence. And I knew that the writing was on the wall without having to ask a whole lot of more questions. And I said, "Doctor, how long do I have?" And he said about 2 weeks. That was the prognosis at that point. And he said, "But we have to take you in immediately now and put you on a maximum volume drip to try to relieve your kidneys as much as possible." So for the next 4 days, I thought this was it. and I started making plans. I was going to go off down to Kinmare, go to my ancestral home where I grew up, and get my sister involved in trying to get palliative care to be with me for the last couple of weeks. Now, the fact that I'm here more than 2 years afterwards means that something happened, and something pretty dramatic and almost miraculous happened. I have a brother over in New York who is a very good brother, very charitable to me. He's very well off, very rich, and has all kinds of contacts. And at the end of the day, it isn't who you know, it isn't what you know, it's who you know, right? So anyway, he got me in on an emergency basis to the Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is the second top cancer clinic in America, and probably the second top clinic in the world. And there was a rescue mission put in place for me, which accounts for my presence here today. The rescue helicopter was dispatched to me. But for about 4 days, I was absolutely certain this is the end of the road and I'm checking out, right, okay? And you have to be there to know what that's like. I'd been a priest for over 20 years, and I had done all kinds of hospital care, hospice care, all kinds of things that a priest experiences in terms of accompanying people through death, both the patient and the family. And this was me suddenly switching roles. I was the person who was checking out. And, mortality was always something that happened to other people. I never really thought it was going to happen to me one day, right, okay, which is what it looked at that point. And I was thinking about, what's going to happen to me? And I said to myself, this is the ultimate bungee jump, because I'm going to be just jumping off the top of the highest bridge or building in the world, and, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to disappear into eternal nothingness? Or will there be someone there to grab me, right? And being an engineer in my earlier life and having studied philosophy, I was really kind of very much taken in with this. And it was the first time I really thought about the big picture, not in a kind of a theory sense, but in a very practical sense about where I was going. Now, there's a very impressive American president by the name of F.D. Roosevelt, who had a great bit of wisdom that I've kept in the back of my head, possibly for situations such as these. He became president at the very height of the American Depression, March of 1933, and in his inaugural address, he said, all we have to fear is fear itself. If we can somehow have a security net around us so that we're not afraid, then we don't have to fear about anything that's coming in our direction, right? And obviously he was thinking, I suppose, in practical terms about the Great Depression that had enveloped the American nation. So what I did in those 4 days when I was certain I was checking out was I made a great surrender of my life to Jesus. I put all of my eggs into his basket. Ever since I was a child, maybe around the time of my first Holy Communion, I had a great attraction for Psalm 23, which is something that we've all heard at funerals and other such occasions. The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want. Fresh and green are the pastures where he gives me repose. So I just put everything that I was experiencing, all of the turmoil in my head, the chaos, the thing about where am I going, right? And I just put everything into Jesus' hands. And I can honestly say that I felt an incredible peace about all of that. And I was thinking in particular about, well, what's it going to be like when I die, right? When, the end actually comes. And again, being the engineer and having kind of all kinds of future scenarios in my head, I was thinking about some of those very impressive near-death experiences that I'm sure that many of us have heard. I was talking to my dental hygienist yesterday, who had a very vivid near-death experience that she told me about her father, and I was in no way, raising this issue with her. But one of the most impressive near-death experiences that I've come across is a Filipino man by the name of Stanley Villavicento. And he's on YouTube, and if you're interested, I can give you the link to his testimony. But he had that experience of being drawn out of his body, going into a long black tunnel, coming out the other end. And when he did, he found himself in this inaccessibly bright light, which is one of the images that comes out of the New Testament for God, who is all infinite majesty, glory, truth, beauty, goodness, etc., etc. And after finding himself completely overwhelmed by this light, the light eventually subsided, and he saw Jesus, and he was a very ordinary-looking Jesus. And what he did was he experienced the final judgment. And when we think about stuff like the final judgment, we can think we are in a courtroom like Judge Judy or any of the drama that we see on television. But the final judgment isn't anything like that. All that happened was that himself and Jesus looked at what we might call a moral video of his life, and everything that he had said and done and was just made manifest in this moral video that played as if everything was happening in suspended animation. And it was very, very clear at the end of the video what he had done in terms of choosing for or against God. And that's the ultimate thing that happens in our life. We choose for or against God. Now, our friend, Brother Stanley, had lived a pretty good life. He believed in Jesus, and he thought everything was okay. But Jesus says, I'm sending you back. I want you to tell your story to everyone in the world that you can possibly make the testimony to. And he's made, I think, tens of thousands of witnesses all over the world over the last 20 years. And by the way, Brother Stanley was certified dead, I believe, for something like 3 days before he came back to life again. So as I was thinking about this journey that was coming up, I was going to go through the long black tunnel, and I was going to go into the light, and I was going to see Jesus, and I was going to see a whole video of my life, the good and the bad. What I did, again, in making that surrender to Jesus was to take on the second stanza of Psalm 23. Even though I go through the dark valley, between this world and the next, even though I go through the dark valley, no evil would I fear. You are there with your crook and your staff. With these you give me comfort. So that was my plan of action until my brother got involved, and suddenly there was the possibility of a rescue mission. And of course, when we take that beautiful Psalm 23, it ends on a note of extravagant hope. In the Lord's own house shall I dwell forever and ever. Now, over the last 2 years of my life, I've spent most of that with my brother over in New York, being in and out of other types of treatment. And I've had a lot of time to think about big picture stuff. And I'd like to share with you 2 points in particular that have really crystallized in my mind. And that is, the first one is how easy it is for all of us to live in what I call a fool's paradise, where we block out the certainty of death and mortality. It's so easy to think that this life goes on forever. The alarm clock will go off every morning, and we'll go into the bathroom and we'll do our business, and we'll go downstairs and have toast and tea and breakfast and go to work and answer emails and blah, 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 answer the phone and have lunch and come home in the evening and have our supper and watch television and go to bed, and the whole thing repeats infinitely. But it doesn't, because it is certain that in 100 years' time, all of us here are going to be dead. We'll be outside in some place like, Frosses Cemetery here. And not only are we going to be out there, our children are going to be out there as well, okay? And that's a complete certainty. So, this is nothing more, hopefully, than a reality check. Now, the other illusion it's actually a delusion about this fool's paradise that I think lots of people live in, is that after we die, there is some sort of universal salvation, and we all kind of, wander off into the clouds, and we flap our wings, and we get a harp, and we live happily ever after. And this is the very clear message that is given at most funerals. It sounds as if everybody who has died is up in heaven looking down on top of us, and they're having a great time. And at best, that is wishful thinking. And the reason why that's wishful thinking is that the Bible is very, very clear that we have to choose heaven in order to get there. And one of the fundamental principles of life for us as humans is that we reap what we sow. And if we have only lived the life of a nominal, lapsed Christian, then, we shouldn't be too presumptuous about getting to heaven. And there's some funerals that I attend and I want to scream because, what is happening is just completely, the best thing I can call it is wishful thinking. Now, this didn't happen anywhere around here, but there was this story I heard once about this guy called Uncle Harry, and he died. And Uncle Harry probably never darkened the door of the church too often. And the priest was up, where I am now, and he was going on in his homily, and he was all waffle, because Uncle Harry loved playing poker and drinking bourbon. And the priest was waffling on about, Uncle Harry being up in heaven with Jesus, playing poker and knocking back shots of bourbon. Now, if that kind of talk was happening down the pub afterwards, and if the lads were having a bit of a celebration of Harry and their memories of him, that might have some kind of, you could read it in a certain context. But the priest was putting this across as if it was gospel truth. And, the most charitable thing we can say about it is wishful thinking. And another thing that Jesus tells us in the gospel is that we enter eternal life through the narrow gate. So we have to choose Jesus, we have to choose God, we have to choose to be faithful to our baptismal promises if we are to be in the fullness of God's life forever in heaven. And I think that, when we think about that, about the fact that mortality is certain, in a few weeks' time we're going to get ashes on our forehead, and the priest will say, "Remember, man, thou art dust, into dust thou shalt return." When we think about how certain mortality is, and that with regard to getting to heaven, we will reap what we sow, that I think is a very accurate way of putting the picture, again from St. Paul in the New Testament, that there's a certain urgency about making sure that our lives have been committed to Jesus as our Lord and Savior. And when you get, and your children get, to that point where I was above in Letterkenny Hospital, expecting that I had about 2 weeks to live, that you can make that great surrender to Jesus and put everything into his hands. And that has given me more than anything else that has ever happened in my life, including the 6 years I spent studying in the seminary, why I need Jesus. Has anyone got any questions about this? Does it all make sense, does it? Okay. So that is it, okay? Now, in order for this to really register, we have to be able to put ourselves within the vision of life given to us by the church, and ultimately by Jesus himself, as we have it in the New Testament. Now, I'd like to show you a little picture, and I'd like you to look at this and tell me what it is that you see. Some of you might have seen this before. What do you all see? Some people can see Jesus. What can you see, Seamus? Jesus, okay? Now, I'm sure that there's lots of you who can't see Jesus at this point. All you see is kind of Chinese letters and meaningless shapes and stuff. I know that there's probably at least half of you who can't see Jesus, okay? Now, in order to see Jesus, you have to have right perspective, right? And to have the right perspective here in this visual aid, you need to appreciate that there is a black border, black letters, and a white background. Now, Seamus, can you be so good as to come up and trace the letter J for anybody who is unable to see Jesus? So Seamus is going to do us a favor, and he's going to trace the letter J. Okay, the letter J, black J, white background, okay? And now the letter E, a black E, and the letter S, and the letter U, and the letter S. Can we all see Jesus now, can we, right? Right, hopefully, right. Okay. Now, what I do is I use this as an analogy. It is the gift of faith. If you're able to look at the thing in the right way, you can see Jesus, and you can see that the Lord is my shepherd, there's nothing I shall want. World War III is coming down the track in half an hour, but the Lord is my shepherd, there's nothing I shall want, okay? But if you don't have the right perspective, and if you're on your own in a totally meaningless universe, and you have no security and no future and anything else that might be worrying you about the future, I mean, you're lost, right? Okay? And so that's the wonderful gift of faith that I want your children to have. Is that reasonable, is it? And I'm sure that you want your children to have that faith as well, do you? Is there anyone here who doesn't want their children to have that faith? Now, in order for us to have this gift of faith, being able to see Jesus, being able to see ourselves as pilgrims on the way to eternal life, there is 3 essential practices that we have to live by in order to have that come about, okay? The first one is that we need to pray every day. Pope Benedict, the last Pope, bless him, he made things very simple. He said Christianity is basically friendship with God. And if we don't talk to our friends, they become strangers, whether they're spouses, parents, children, brothers, sisters, whatever, okay? So if we don't say our prayers every day and make that a serious commitment, then God becomes a stranger and we just lose Jesus, okay? The second thing that we have to do is we have to come to Mass every Sunday and every holy day. Now, if you had brought a sleeping bag and we could, talk here until midnight, we could go into all of the reasons why Mass is so important. But if you want to have the bottom line, it is that before Jesus died, Jesus had the Last Supper, and his last words in the Last Supper were, "Do this in memory of me." So repeating the Last Supper in his memory was Jesus' last will and testament. And if Jesus is an important figure to us, if he's our good shepherd, Lord and Savior, and if he died on the cross for our sins, etc., etc., and if he had something as important to him as a last will and testament, we don't argue about it, we don't ignore it, we just do it without question. Does that make sense, does it, right? And if you think about those words, "Do this in memory of me," there is almost a promise built into that if we're faithful to that, we will remember the Christian big picture. I have a relative at the moment who has kind of advanced Alzheimer's or dementia, whatever it is. And he has completely lost contact with his whole world. He doesn't know me, he doesn't know his son, he just about knows his wife, and he's completely zoned out, okay, because he's lost his memory. But if we lose our Christian memory, we lose that perspective of the big picture that is so precious to us. Okay? And if we miss Mass on a Sunday or on a holy day for other than a serious reason, we commit a grave sin, and we cannot go to Holy Communion worthily until we go to confession and make a new start with the Lord. And the reason why that's such a big issue, again, is because it was Jesus' last will and testament, and it has an enormous significance attached to it with regard to what is important maybe and what is not so important in terms of the Christian life, okay? The third thing that is a key, indispensable part of Christian living is that we live by the Ten Commandments. God gave them to Moses in the year about 1350 BC. They were written on tablets of stone, and if something is written in stone, even in today's language, it means it's fixed. If God had written the Ten Commandments on a blackboard, and if they became unfashionable, we could get a duster and we could do some editing, couldn't we, right? Okay, like the animals did in Animal Farm. But because God wrote the Ten Commandments on tablets of stone, it's God's truth, and truth doesn't change any more than God does. Okay, so if one has drifted away from Jesus and you want to recommit to him, what is it that you have to do? Well, it might be one solution we might think would be that, well, we just start up again. We say our prayers every day and we go to Mass every Sunday and we pick up on the Ten Commandments. But when we have been away from Jesus, we have to say sorry. If you can imagine, say, a marriage relationship, one of the parties in that has been unfaithful. And it isn't just a matter of getting back into the marriage relationship and resuming as if nothing happened. You know, the unfaithful party has to say sorry, and I'm making a new start, and then, you know, after that, you can, as it were, reboot the relationship. Now, the other thing I wanted to do this evening was to make a little friendly reminder of the promises that were made at the baptism of your children. At the very start of the ceremony, the priest said, "What name do you give to your child?" John Francis, okay? What do you ask of God's church for John Francis? And then you say baptism, right? And then what the priest did was he addressed words that underlined the sacred commitment that you make to God to bring the child up in the faith. The priest said, "You have asked to have your child baptized. In doing so, you are accepting the responsibility of training him or her in the practice of the faith. It would be your duty to bring him or her up to keep God's commandments as Christ taught us by loving God and our neighbor." And then the priest says, "Do you clearly understand what you are undertaking?" Okay? And everyone here, when you had your children baptized, you said, "We do," right? Okay? And that's an important commitment. And when you meet Jesus at the end of your life, he will hold you to that, and he will ask you if you have been faithful to it. Now, I don't like to hammer on seeing the Christian life as a set of obligations and commitments. Ultimately, it's about being a child of God, and it's about passing through this world as a pilgrim, and at the end we go back to our Father and the place he has reserved for us. But in a time where there is great lukewarmness, laxity, indifference to Christian commitment, I thought it was just important to underline that. Now, I've given you a faith testimony. I have spoken to you about what Jesus means to me, particularly in those 4 days above at Letterkenny back in June of 2021, when I thought this is the end of the road. But I'd like to ask Seamus to come up. Seamus isn't a priest. He's not a God professional like myself. He works in the realm of social work. But Jesus is a very important person to him as well, right? Okay, so Seamus, let's hear it, okay?
I suppose, firstly, I'd really like to congratulate us for bringing your children this far in your faith and your commitment to your family units, whatever family units they are. And I'd also like to welcome whatever denomination or whatever religion you belong to this evening. You're very welcome. I suppose when I was trying to put this together, when Father Morty asked me, I was trying to figure out what do you actually say, and it's very hard to come up in front of your own people and talk about this. If it was down in Galway, I'd have no problem because nobody would know me. But I thought about it, and I remember reading a book that Pope Francis wrote about the pilgrim journey to Christ, and that pilgrim journey that we start. And I suppose for me, it started at that font at the baptismal font, when my mother and father presented me here in Frosses as a child. And the very commitment of the rite of baptism that Father Morty was talking about was the start of my journey in our faith. From there, I suppose, then you had your childhood experiences where you were presented for confession. And confession, when I first went to it, you rhymed off a list of things that you were taught as a child. And that usually came from your primary school and with some guidance from your parents. As you grow older and you become an adult, and as you build your relationship with Christ, the whole confession thing changes into a more meaningful and a more deep relationship with Christ. And I suppose what I'm trying to say there is the hard journey of having to go to confessions and having to talk to a priest. I'm sure, Father Morty, you're inundated with confessions all the time.
Not exactly.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's really a great opportunity to reflect and kind of look at where you're going in your own faith. And it's an instrument, that's why Jesus put that instrument there for us, or a sacrament, that we get an opportunity to reflect on our journey with Him and our relationship with Him. I suppose the next big thing after the confessions was First Communion and being presented for First Communion. And that was very special because when I made my First Communion, it was very much not just a family thing, it was the whole community came together. And it was very much focused on the First Communion itself. And there wasn't as much, there was definitely no bouncing castles, I can tell you that. And there was no big celebrations as such, it was very much family. And you know what, sometimes stripping stuff back, and I'm working social work for over 25 years and I've seen all types of mix and situations of families. Stripping it back being simple, there's nothing wrong with it either, rather than going with the flow, what everybody else does. So when I was reflecting on First Communion and what it means to me now, I suppose my best friend is here beside me in the Blessed Sacrament, and that's why there's a light there constantly there. And I suppose there's times in the day or week that you might be fed up, things are getting too much at home, work might be stressful, and it's a lovely place to come for 10, 15 minutes, maybe light a candle, and get a bit of time and space with Jesus. It really is. Then, I suppose in relation to some of you are married, I'm sure, and some of you may not, and we all have different types of families and what they're made up of, and that's fine. And, of course, Father Morty has the Holy Orders, which is probably one of the highest kind of awards or acclamations you can get, that you're a disciple of Christ and you're there for the people. And I remember reading after Pope Francis came into place as Pope, and the one thing he said was, because the last 20 years, our church is like a hospital. We have a lot of sick patients, we have a lot of hurt people, and you as priests should be amongst the people. Be the people, not be judging them, and use the door and the mat into the church. You should be that person that they wipe their feet on. So I found him very inspiring. He's in his 90s now, and I think he has brought a lot of goodness to the church and has changed it to make it more meaningful for me anyway, as a person. I suppose then looking in general at what's the most important thing for me in relation to my faith. And definitely, for sure, the Eucharist is very much the heart of what it's all about. And it's probably the biggest, the most powerful witness you can have is to come to Mass and receive the sacraments. And it's not just a wafer it's in there. If we believe in our Catholic faith, the real presence of Christ happens at the consecration at the altar. And at that time, I remember a lovely priest, and I'm based up in Maryland Park Hospital in Galway, and he was saying Mass for us on Holy Souls Day. And he says, at the moment of the consecration of the altar, when the priest places his hands over the bread and the blood of Christ, the heavens unite with earth at that moment. And that is the time for you to unite with the people who have passed away, or place whatever is bothering you on that set day on the altar. And I thought it was a lovely and special thing for him to say, and it really inspired a lot of us at the time, because I'm sure you can gather that the kind of work, social work and that can be very demanding at times. Also, I want to say too, today and this week is actually Catholic Schools Week. And we should be very thankful for all the teachers, all those support people who work in the schools, anything from our cleaners right through to our SNAs, whoever helps out makes life easy for us, and the spiritual directors, let it be lay chaplains or the religious. And one of the big things that the Catholic bishops were saying this week is, because our church has become a lot more secular and we've moved away from the whole idea of faith and what faith means, and other things have become a lot more important, those that are actually helping out in parishes and anybody else that's interested, we have to become missionaries on the ground. And that's not far removed from what's actually, I think it's in Mark 28 about that Jesus asked us to become his missionaries throughout the world. And a missionary person doesn't have to be a priest. If you're in a lot of other countries, the lay people do everything. And I was talking to what was the wee priest we had there in the summer?
Father Joseph.
Sorry?
Father Joseph.
Yeah, Father Joseph. And he was telling me he gets bread maybe every 2 months, fresh bread. That's where he is. He travels 3.5 to 4 hours to one of his churches. And the lay people do everything in between. He might see them for 3 or 4 weeks, and it's a huge celebration that they do. That's a very live church where he is anyway, but a very humble church as well. So I suppose what Pope Francis was saying too, that we should become witnesses of Christ. And I kind of thought about that in our daily life and what we do. You don't have to be some sort of a big film star or somebody that's in the limelight. And I suppose the things he was saying is that not just you have been a light, that you are his light once you're baptised as a Catholic or into any Christian church, let it be. And that light should shine through you in situations. And he said that maybe a gentle smile someday to somebody that's really down in the dumps or is having a hard day might be a very Christ-like thing to do. Or when there's a bit of gossip going around the place that's rampant and somebody's getting great enjoyment out of spreading it, sure, we're all guilty of a bit of gossip, I'm sure, that we should try and diffuse that, and the person they're talking about we should actually pray for. Then he used the other example then was that if you have an argument with somebody, don't be always having to have the last word. Try and find a way out of it without offending the other person, and try to be that better kind of person. So then, I suppose the last bit, because I don't want to delay it too much, is what are the kind of things that makes you a better Christian or a better Catholic? And as I was saying earlier, the sacrament of confession, at least weekly communion if you can. It doesn't always work out. There could be circumstances that it doesn't happen. Pray in the divine office for some people, and that's becoming a lot more popular with our 20 to 30-year-old Catholics. The Rosary Adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, and being a witness to your own faith as well. I was talking there to somebody in Knoxrine, and they coordinate a lot of kind of parish renewal. And the biggest and growing church at the moment in Ireland is, believe it or not, the older style of a Catholic church, and extremely popular between the 20 and 30-year-olds. And I happened to be in Cork myself, looking for a place to go to Mass there about 6 months ago. And I went in, and there was a Tridentine Mass, and the church was full. And that, definitely the average age group was from 8 years up to about 30. What's that saying? So there is a need and a want for young people in particular, and especially with kind of mental health issues. So I wish you all well, and I hope to be there myself for confirmation. I'm not here to judge anybody or dictate to anybody, but just to share a journey. And for me, my faith's very important. And at some stage in my life too, I'll have to face my Maker. And I don't assume, no more than Father Morty, that I'm going straight up to heaven. But if I can say anything to you, if you only come, light a candle, and get yourself back into that zone and time, and it might be a nice thing if you get a chance to maybe bring your child and light a candle with them here some stage, and get them used to the church here as well before their first or confirmation. And I hope to be going back down the road on Sunday, and I will light a candle in Knoxrine for all parents and for all the kids that are to make their confirmation here, and for all our priests that have served us so well over the years here. And we've had a lot of good priests, and of course we have had issues as well, as you all know, but we have to move forward. And a lot of that in the past is 20 years ago, but we're still using it as a crutch to say, well, why would we go back there? Why would we get involved? Sure, look at what they did. That's 20 years ago, most of them. So the one thing that I remember being told in a philosophy class by this guy who was in the army up in the Curragh, and he said, the difference between us and animals is that we have a conscience. So I suppose there's the tagline: it's up to your own conscience what you do and what you choose. And thanks very much.
Thanks, Seamus. One of the things that came to mind when you were talking about the social health and all that, there was an article in the Irish Catholic about the Dublin riots. And all of what we got on RTE and the regular media was that it was far-right thugs, right? And they were all to blame. And obviously that's a certain part of the problem. But David Quinn was asking the question, how many of these young people who were thugging and rioting, how many of them were given the gift of really believing in Jesus? How many of those rioters would have said their prayers every day, would have gone to Mass every Sunday and every holy day, and would have known the 10 Commandments and what it is to live by them? And it's a fair guess that not many of them probably said their prayers every day, went to Mass every Sunday, and lived by the 10 Commandments. Now, I have a few more things that I want to just run past, okay? We have a big job in trying to give Jesus to our young people. There was a survey, an exit poll done at the time of the last general election. And one of the questions asked was of college-age young people, and how many of them went to Mass every Sunday and every holy day as a baseline of Christian commitment. And there was 7% went to Mass every Sunday and every holy day, 93% didn't, right? And that's because we're living in a culture that is just caustic and corrosive with regard to the wherewithal of what it is to believe in Jesus. So we really have to work hard, very hard, at trying to make our homes Christian families. The church says that the place where we meet Jesus, meet God, isn't in a Catholic church building, it's not in a Catholic school, it is in a Catholic family. And if your children don't find God in your family, they ain't going to find it anyplace else. My first religious experience was at about the age of 3, and I was at home in the kitchen, and above and the wall was this picture of the Sacred Heart, and Jesus was looking out at you, and there was a red lamp, and Granny said, "That's Holy God." And I looked up at the Sacred Heart picture, and I looked at, Jesus was looking down at me, and it was a completely real experience. Yeah, that's Holy God. And I don't think I've ever lost my sense of, living in the presence of God from that point onwards. I was only about, I think, 3 years of age. We have to find God in our families if we are to find him anywhere in life. The other point is that faith is like a relay race. St. Noel, another Munster man, I'm from Kerry, he came from Tipperary, came up and was instrumental in starting Christianity here, probably somewhere in the 7th century. And we're all here as Christians because there has been an unbroken chain of family transmission of Christianity down to the centuries. But you see, if that chain breaks, if your children grow up, and this is my concern as a pastor, and they're nominal, fallen away Catholics, then the chances of them ever passing on real Christianity to their children is almost negligible. So once the chain breaks, there is no more transmission of the good news. And all of these future generations are going to come to the end of the road, like I did above in Letterkenny Hospital in June of 2021, and they don't have Jesus the Good Shepherd to turn to. And that's obviously something that, as a pastor and as a shepherd of souls, I am very much concerned about. Now, I want to make a few concrete suggestions to all of you, right? And one of the things I'm going to be passing out is a little prayer sheet, and it is for you personally. So there'll be 2 for mum and dad of all of the children who are receiving sacraments. And there's a little prayer schedule for prayers in the morning, prayers in midday, and prayers in the evening. So I'm going to give out that to you as a suggestion of deepening your own prayer life, okay? Now, the other thing that's of crucial importance in all of what I'm talking about is that you know what it is to be a Christian, and all the more so living in a secular culture that lives as if God and eternity and all the rest doesn't exist, right? We need to know our faith. And what you learned in 6th class for your confirmation is really inadequate given where we are today, right? Now, at the very back, at the end of this sheet that everyone will get, is a link. It's my Dropbox, and there is 50 catechetical talks by this person called Archbishop Fulton Sheen, and it's a brilliant A to Z of everything Catholic and Christian, right? These talks they're about 20 minutes long. You can listen to them in the car going to work, or when you're walking the dog, or going shopping if you're going to Letterkenny or someplace like that, okay? And I would really invite you to make the time commitment to listen to these 50 talks, and you'll be experts on everything about being a Christian in today's world that you need to know about, okay? Imagine if you were going to Mars on one of these trips, right? You'd want to know everything about the rocket that's taking you there and what it's going to be like to live in Mars, wouldn't you, right? You'd be looking at every YouTube video and everything else that would give you some insight into where you're going, right? And all the more so do we need to know about what it is to be a Christian and the wonderful future and destiny that God has ready for us in his own home. Okay. Now, the other thing is about confirmation sponsors. Confirmation sponsors have to renew their baptismal promises at the Mass that the bishop will be celebrating here in a few months' time, okay? And godparents, it isn't just some sort of a thing we do within our family. They need to be committed Christians, because they won't be able to answer truthfully the renewal of baptismal promises that'll happen at that Mass if they're not saying their prayers every day. if they're not going to Mass every Sunday and every Holy Day, and if they're not living by the 10 Commandments. So there's going to be one of these given out when I stop talking, right? The other thing that we're going to be passing out, and this is going to be one per child, is the enrolment form. It's all pretty routine. The child's name, date of birth, address, air code, school attending, whether you're having confirmation or First Communion, the names of the parents, guardians, the phone number. And then we're asking you to make a commitment. And this is what it says, okay? In sincerely enrolling my child in this First Communion confirmation program, I understand that daily family prayer and attendance at Mass on Sundays and holy days is important. It's actually a little bit more than important, it's essential. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to give out one of these for every child receiving a sacrament. Don't sign it now, take it home, pray and think about it, and when you really are ready to make the commitment, sign it, bring it to Mass some Sunday and give it to the priest. I would have the greatest admiration for any family who would say, I really can't sign that now. My commitment, the family's commitment to Jesus isn't there yet, and maybe it will be there in the future. So maybe we'll get back to First Communion or confirmation next year or the year after or any time for the next 75 years, right, okay? But what we're asking you to do is to be sincere in committing your child for the real religious meaning, the commitment to Christian living that is represented by the sacrament. Now, if there's any personal issues that have come up in all of the talking that I've done here, you're most welcome to come and talk to me. I'm over in Ardahi Parochial House. Ring before you come, and I'll have the kettle on, and I have lots of cake and stuff left over from Christmas, and we can sit down in the front room and we can have a chat about anything that I might be able to help you with in order to, increase and double down on that commitment to Jesus as your Lord and Saviour. Is there any questions about anything that I've said? I'm sure that you're all bubbling with questions, are you, right? Any questions at all? Okay. So it kind of all makes sense, does it? Okay. I have a little summary here that I want to run through in order to bring our evening to a conclusion. Okay. My friends, some of them tell me I spend too much time thinking, right? Okay. And I've had 2 years largely living in my brother's bedroom over in New York to think about everything and anything that's going on in my life and in the world, and the Catholic world especially, right, okay? And one of the things that I have resolved to do is that every funeral I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and every wedding Mass I'm going to do for the rest of my life, I'm going to start off my homily with the 2 leading questions from the Old Catechism. And the first one was, who made me? And the answer is, God made me. And why did God make me? And the answer is to know him, to love him, and serve him in this life, and be happy with him forever in the next. Okay? And if we have that in our heads, we will, I think, have all of the navigation smarts that we need to get from where I am now to the home that God has for us in heaven. One of the other things that I throw out at funeral homilies, and it's a wonderful one-line expression of our Christian faith, is the last words spoken by St. John Paul II when he died on the April the 2nd, 2005. And he said, I will go to my Father's house. I'm not some sort of a meaningless speck of random existence and consciousness in a meaningless universe. I have come from God. God is my Father. I am traveling through this world as a pilgrim. And then at the end of my journey, I go back to my Father and the place that he has reserved for me in his home. And if you've been to funerals, as I'm sure you have, probably half of the Catholic funerals that we have anywhere in the world, whether it's Ireland or over in New York, have that beautiful passage of John chapter 14. Jesus says in the Last Supper, "There's many rooms in my Father's house, and I'm going now before you to prepare a place so that where I am, you may be too." Which, I mean, if people have drifted away and they would like to recommit their lives to Jesus, I have confessions in our Dahi every Saturday from 11 to 11:30, and if there's 75 people who show up on Saturday, I'll stay there until 4 o'clock in the afternoon to hear everybody. Or if people want to come and see me in the parochial house by appointment, that is grand as well. So whatever it is that I might be able to help you with. Now, I might have come across a little bit overzealous, right, okay? And I take this thing seriously, right? And I've taken it all the more seriously after that experience in Letterkenny Hospital, when for 4 days I was certain that I had 2 weeks left in my life, and then it was the end of the road, okay? And this zeal that I have, this born-again perspective, is something that has filled me with, I suppose, a concern for getting everyone who is one of my flock to have that same preparedness for leaving this world and going to God in the state of righteousness. So are we sure that there isn't any questions? Does it all make sense, does it, right? Okay, so the only reason why we're here this evening is for the sake of your children and their Christian formation, but also for all of you as well. Okay, so if I can have Margaret and Seamus to come up, and if you can start off by passing out the enrollment forms. So there is one for every child name.